Hey everyone, I'm Sison, and today we're taking a look at the Sigma 150-600 F5-6.3 Contemporary lens. The 150-600mm Contemporary is a super telephoto zoom lens from Sigma and is the cheaper alternative to the sports version, which offers the same focal length and aperture. It's made for a variety of mounts from Canon, Nikon and Sigma, but today I'll be using it on my Sony A7RM2 coupled with the MC11 adapter, which allows me to mount Canon EF Sigma lenses onto my E-mount body. Now I'm going to primarily focus on its autofocus speed and performance on my E-mount body, so if you're a Canon or Nikon shooter, it's going to be a bit different from your camera. Now that that's out of the way, let's just jump right into it. The lens has a black finish and feels like it's constructed primarily out of plastic. Pairing this lens with the Sigma MC11 and the Sony A7RM2 will enable me to use the lens's features as well as the camera's features, but I'll talk about that more a bit later. It has a metal mount and weather seals around the gasket of the mount, and there is also a supplied plastic barrel type lens hood. Showing you around the lens, you have a focus distance window, a rubber zoom ring, and a focus ring, which is rather small and is located just above the focus distance window. There is a contemporary badge on the side as well as a lock switch to prevent any zoom creep, but you can also lock it at different focal lengths where it is printed on the lens. The lens accepts 95mm filters and has a tripod collar which you can remove. On the side of the lens there are a number of switches for different settings. AF is for autofocus, MO is called manual override, where the lens will autofocus, but you can use the manual focus ring to tweak your focus. And MF is manual focus. Underneath is your focus limiter. Full will enable the lens to use the full autofocusing range of the lens. The switch in the middle will limit the focusing range from 10 meters to infinite. And the final switch is for close subjects, where the lens will focus from 2.8 meters to 10 meters. The next switch is to do with stabilization. Mode 1 will stabilize the lens for subjects when you're standing still. Mode 2 will help stabilize the lens for when you're panning. And off means you're simply turning off the stabilization. And finally, the last switch has two custom modes that you could set up via the Sigma USB dock. Now the lens weighs approximately 1.93 kilos. Add the MC11 adapter in, it adds another 120 grams, so that's well over 2 kilos added to your kit, and that's not including the camera. So I wouldn't really recommend using this handheld, but instead using a good quality tripod that can handle the payload of not only the lens and the adapter, but also the camera itself. The zoom ring feels a bit loose to turn, and the manual focus ring has just the right amount of resistance to it. When zooming in, the lens does extend away from the body, adding about another 8.5 centimeters. And it can also focus as close as 2.8 meters. The lens features optical stabilization, which is a must for a lens like this, especially when you're photographing subjects zoomed all the way in. And when used with a Sony camera that has stabilization built into the body, they do work together to correct for any shake in your photos or videos. The lens does have an HSM motor, otherwise known as a hypersonic motor for quick and quiet focusing, which is similar to Sony's SSM motor. Speaking of autofocus, it wasn't as quick as I hoped it would be. For this little test, I only had a Sony A7RM2 with me to use this lens on, so the performance will be different from camera to camera. I expect it to be faster on the A6300 and A6500 cameras though, because it has a better autofocusing system. I was using AFS with center point autofocus for this little test. For subjects that were moving, I found it worked best with lock-on AF flexible spot. It wasn't perfect, but I managed to get a few decent shots with it. It tended to hunt on a few occasions, and that was with me using the focus limiter, and my hit rate was about 60% with shots in focus. Now, like I mentioned with my MC11 video, you can use Sony features that are usually unavailable when you adapt lenses to E-mount bodies. So things like IAF, autofocusing modes and areas, and DMF is still available. Although DMF is very much like Sigma's MO function, which is manual override. When it comes down to image quality, it produced some decent results with the lens tack sharp at the wider focal lengths. When it came down to sharpness when zoomed all the way in, it wasn't as good, but still acceptable by my standards. Autofocus blur for this lens was surprisingly decent for what I was expecting. It was reasonably smooth and wasn't too harsh for this type of lens. I didn't notice any way of distortions or vignetting from my time shooting with it, which is a big plus. I did notice a bit of chromatic aberration when shooting in high contrast situations, but nothing too bad to warrant this as a major issue, as it can be corrected in Photoshop or Lightroom. Of course, with a lens like this, it's not going to be the best in low light situations, so it's best to either pump up the ISO or use a longer shutter speed, which may be pointless for certain types of photography. Otherwise, it's best to shoot in bright conditions with sufficient light. All of these photos were shot with the Sony A7RM2. Now, I didn't shoot too much video with this lens, but when I used continuous autofocus, it was slow but smooth. You may also hear the mode of focusing depending on how quiet the environment is. The Sigma 150-600 Contemporary is a lens that offers good value for money given its focal length and features. Now, for the Sony E-mount shooter, there aren't any super telephoto zoom lenses to date, but because of the MC11 adapter, it does open up a lot of options for you in the Sigma lens range. Now, to talk about the downsides of this combination, it was very slow to focus and it was a bit unreliable, especially on fast moving subjects, which is a bit unfortunate. Now, I feel like this lens is more in line with subjects that aren't moving very fast, like maybe boats or even wildlife that aren't moving very fast or just standing still. Now, when I did manage to grab focus, the images were very sharp, although not as sharp when zoomed all the way in. But to be fair, I don't expect this lens to be perfect all the way through. Now, I don't recommend hand holding this combination for long periods of time because you're just going to tire yourself out. So I do recommend using a tripod or a monopod. But if you can live with the lens's shortcomings and still need the lens range of a super telephoto lens that isn't too expensive, especially when you compare it to the sports version of this lens, it can make for a valuable addition to your kit. Now, that's it from me, but if you have any more questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. And if you're using this lens on an E-mount body, let me know what you think of it. And remember to like this video if you found it helpful. And subscribe to my channel for more Sigma lens reviews and tutorials. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram for more sample photos and photo updates. And be sure to check the description below for more product information and purchasing links. Now, until then, happy shooting and thanks for watching. I got a mosquito bite on my pinky. But now that's got out of the way. Well, now that's out of... Oh, it was close. Now that's out of the way. Now that that's out of the way, let's just go right into it. Fogicles. And aren't any super telephoto zoom lenses to date, but because the mount shooter, there aren't any super